Threats of sanctions against Turkey and war threats against Iran. The rhetoric between Trump, Erdogan, and the Ayatollah is heating up. What does it all mean? Well, joining us with some insights is Robert Spencer. He's the director of Jihad Watch. He has a new book out called The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS. So, Robert, good to see you again. Let's talk about Erdogan. He says the U.S. risks losing a sincere partner if it imposes sanctions, because he won't free Pastor Brunson, of course. He says Turkey will explore options. So how sincere is Erdogan, and what are these options he's talking about?
He hasn't been a sincere partner in years. He's been working to re-Islamize Turkey. It's very clear, as many of his opponents on all sides of the political spectrum have charged, that he wants to restore the Ottoman Caliphate. He has declared that the lands that once belonged to the Ottoman Caliphate, such as the whole Eastern Mediterranean area, North Africa, Greece, they all belong by right to Turkey. And it seems as if he ultimately wants to undertake military adventurism to get them back. The Turks are constantly harassing Greek planes and ships in the Aegean. And so this is supposed to be a NATO ally, a NATO partner. He has not been that for many years. He was buying ISIS oil when ISIS was in control of 60 Iraqi oil wells. And so for him to say now, in connection with Pastor Brunson, that we're risking losing a reliable ally is plain deception. Turkey has not been an ally for a long time.
Let's look a little bit more at that on concerning ISIS. Now, I know from my time in the Middle East, many people have said that he's been a staunch supporter of ISIS for a long time. So how extensive has his support been for ISIS? Is he still supporting the group?
Well, ISIS, of course, has lost most of its territory in Iraq and Syria. And so while, yes, he still supports the group, it's not as important as it used to be when ISIS controlled a territory larger than Great Britain. But yes, he did support them, and this is because ISIS was fighting against Assad and the Kurds. And it seemed to be that Erdogan was working for the long term. What he wanted to do was have ISIS take out Assad and the Kurds, and then he could incorporate ISIS into a renewed Turkish caliphate.
Seems like he really has a longing to control that northern part of Syria.
Oh, yes.
Is ISIS making a comeback? And what about Al-Qaeda?
It's certainly not gone altogether, but it's substantially weakened. I don't think that it's in a position to recover the territory that it once controlled. But certainly it's not gone. We shouldn't think that the job is completely done there by any means.
Are they a threat, or is Al-Qaeda still the greater threat?
Oh, I would say ISIS is still very much the greater threat, partly because they've lost so much territory in Iraq and Syria, and they have internationalized. They've been working not only in Afghanistan and Libya, but also the Philippines and elsewhere around the world. Of course, also, and I think probably of most concern to people in the United States, is the fact that they have called repeatedly upon Muslims in the U.S., in Canada, and in countries of Western Europe to mount lone wolf jihad attacks. And with the dispersal of many of their foreign fighters, remember that in their heyday, they had attracted 30,000 foreign fighters from 100 different countries. And a lot of those jihadis have returned to their homes in Western Europe and even in the United States. I don't think they ever should have been let in. They were enemy combatants who had joined a state that was in a state of war with the United States. But they were let back in, and so I think that it's virtually certain we have not heard the last from them.
And Robert, the president continues to push for a border wall. And as you know, there are many forces in this country who'd like to see open borders. What threat would an open border pose from ISIS and other terrorists?
Well, you know, speaking of ISIS and its continuing threat, another place where it has been active has been Bangladesh. And it's noteworthy that in Laredo, Texas, there have been around 200 Bangladeshi nationals who have been apprehended trying to cross the border illegally. And so you gotta wonder, is ISIS among them? Are they among the Bangladeshis trying to get illegally into the United States? It would stand to reason that if they know that's a vulnerability, they'll exploit it.
Let's move on. I know in your new book you document how over the centuries Islam has relied on jihad to advance the ideology, so I'm assuming this is nothing new, Robert. So when has there been a period as bad as this one, and why are we seeing one now?
Well, I'll tell you, actually, there have been periods quite a bit worse than this one. In the book, The History of Jihad, I show that jihad warfare against unbelievers is a continual phenomenon worldwide since the beginning of Islam in the 7th century. And that in many areas that were Christian, the Muslim invaders came in, conquered the place, placed attacks on the Christians, placed humiliating and discriminatory regulations upon them, and made it so difficult to be a Christian that many of the Christians in those lands, Egypt, all across North Africa, they converted to Islam solely because that was the only way out to not live a life full of harassment and occasional open persecution. And so this was the death of the Christian communities in some of those areas of the Middle East and North Africa that had gone back to the time of the Lord himself. So we have now tremendous jihad activity around the world, but at least so far, there are still free societies where people can practice Christianity in peace. And so we can be grateful for this, but we should remember the one overarching lesson of the history of jihad is that wherever Muslims have gone, they have created conflict with non-Muslims. And obviously not all Muslims do it, but enough of them do that there has always been a state of conflict everywhere in the world where there have been Muslims living with non-Muslims. So the United States of America would be very foolish to think it's going to be different here, and we can bring in massive numbers of Muslims, and there won't be any jihadis among the peaceful Muslims, and we won't ever have any conflict in our society. Bringing in large numbers of Muslims is simply asking for conflict. The historical record is clear, and the fact is that the Muslims in the United States and Western Europe and Canada today, they don't have any different form of Islam from the one that has historically been the impetus for all this jihad warfare. It's the same Islam.
Do you see any reversal of jihad, or do you think we're just going to continue down the same road?
Reversals have been very, very slight. Reversals have been unusual. Reversals were, of course, the 700-year Reconquista in Spain and in parts of India, but really most of the time when Islamic lands have been conquered, they've been Islamized, and the Christians reduced to a tiny subjugated minority. We need to be aware of this history so that we can try to prevent it all from happening again.
Okay, Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch, author of the new book, The History of Jihad, From Muhammad to ISIS. Thank you, Robert, for joining us.
Thank you, Gary.